Salutations, respected viewers. I am George from Ireland. In this video, I'm going to talk about the man of the moment, the person who's on everybody's lips, and that is Pete Buttigieg. So, Mayor Pete, is he the gay JFK? That's what I want to ask. Well, he's young, telegenic, and strikingly handsome. He appears to embody the zeitgeist. He's optimistic, he's moderate, he's forward-looking, and in all these regards, he's the same as John F. Kennedy. Now, JFK was totally hetero, but apart from that, there are some notable similarities between the two. Both are vigorous, energetic campaigners. Both are white, obviously, males, but might be seen as ethnic minorities within whites. Not anymore, because remember, being an Irish Catholic in the 1960s in the United States, well, there was probably still a tiny bit of prejudice left. Like John F. Kennedy, when he was growing up in Boston, some of the Boston Brahmins would have disliked them, saying they weren't real Americans, and saying, oh, Roman Catholics are relatively loyal to the Pope and so on. It was an issue for John F. Kennedy when he was seeking the Democratic nomination, and in 1960, many people preferred Hubert Humphrey because he was a Protestant, and JFK had to answer questions from various Protestant pastors. What if the Vatican attempted to interfere in a manner that was improper, and so on. Al Smith had got the Democratic nomination way back in about 1924. But he'd lost the election, and people thought that his religious denomination was the stumbling block for him. Now, Buttigieg, he's Maltese on his father's side, so Malta's a tiny country. I suppose a lot of people watching this may not have heard of it. It's an island in the Mediterranean, in between Italy and Libya. It's a separate country, part of the European Union. Well, there's the island of Malta. There's two minor islands as well, but the whole country is the Republic of Malta. So, is he an ethnic minority because of that? Arguably. Obviously, there are loads of Irish Americans of Protestant background, and they weren't regarded as minority. They go back to people in the founding fathers. But Irish Catholic, well, the Catholicism bit was still a teensy bit controversial in the 60s. The Ku Klux Klan would still be against us. Well, Buttigieg, his minority issue, I suppose, is his sexual orientation. A bit the way Catholicism was a question mark over Kennedy. Anyway, he overcame it, and he was still able to win the nomination and indeed win the presidency. So Buttigieg's rallies have been targeted by bigots shouting Sodom and Gomorrah and so on. I thought he could silence them by saying, if you're not quiet, I'll come over and kiss you, or something like that. But he respects consent, unlike Donald Trump. This might actually generate sympathy for Buttigieg if these Christian fundamentalists are coming along and excoriating him, them hurling insults at him. That might actually generate more sympathy, so it might in fact be a boon. So both Kennedy and Buttigieg were in the US Navy. Fascinatingly, well, Buttigieg was not in a boat that sank. Well, partly because he was in Afghanistan, a landlocked country. So both attended Harvard and both then studied in the United Kingdom. Well, obviously Pete Buttigieg, he won a Rhodes Scholarship, which is one of the most prestigious scholarships, with about 100 a year, to go to Oxford University, where he read politics. But I remember him parrying some question about his lack of foreign policy experience, saying, well, I learned more about it in Afghanistan than I did when studying international relations at Oxford. I think I'm right in saying he studied philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford, not international relations. And all right, a bit of that is international relations, but he didn't do IR as such. John F. Kennedy, he spent some time at the London School of Economics. I don't think he got a degree from LSE. I don't think he intended to finish. Studied under the redoubtable Harold Lasky. Now, Buttigieg, he sat at the feet of who? I don't know. No very famous dons, as far as I'm aware. So they're both fascinated by international affairs. You ought to dip into John Fitzgerald Kennedy's Why England Slept. But there are some notable dissimilarities between the two. JFK came from a very wealthy family. His father had made a huge fortune in banking, construction, and importing some of the first legal alcohol into the United States right after the end of Prohibition. Matt Buttigieg, he didn't grow up in a house that was that rich. He was not born with a silver spoon in his mouth. No doubt Trump would try and paint him as an elitist, which is obviously very rich, coming from someone who's rich. But Buttigieg, he might be academically elite. Both his parents are professors, but they weren't super wealthy. Anyway, so Buttigieg, he volunteered for this war in Afghanistan, whereas Kennedy, he could have easily pulled strings and avoided serving in the Second World War, but no, he went into danger. So they seem like dream candidates in some ways. But Buttigieg, he doesn't seem very ideological, like Afghanistan. Should we pull out, right or wrong? And he answers that by saying, well, we are pulling out anyway, but not coming at it from first principles. This is what our goal should be, and then therefore this is how we should try to achieve it. So he seems to be a pragmatist and realize that realpolitik is the way to handle these things. So he's not ideological. Is he idealistic? Not too much. He's probably one of the more moderate ones. He's always trying to see whether something is practical. Can this actually be implemented? And he says obviously he recognizes the diabolical horrors of slavery, but he doesn't actually commit to slavery reparations, saying he hasn't seen a workable scheme of how much compensation would be paid to African Americans and who exactly would benefit. What if you're 3/4 white and 1/4 black? Do you get payment or not? What if you're 7/8 white and 1/8 black? And what's the cutoff? But perhaps this is quibbling about the details. Maybe the basic principle should be, if you believe there should be reparations, yes, they should get it, and then we'll worry about the particulars later. So notice how canny he is. He doesn't paint himself into a corner. He doesn't rule it out in principle, but he just waits to see a workable scheme, because it's quite a popular notion amongst Democrats at the moment. So he's perhaps going along with that fad. He doesn't completely jump on the bandwagon, so some would want to. When it comes to the abortion issue, I mean, he doesn't tackle it head on. So is this underhand, or is this just being cunning? Because he could have said, yes, I believe in absolutely no restrictions whatsoever. But he seems to sidestep it, saying, well, this is a woman's issue. It's between her and her physician. And should a woman be allowed to have an abortion even on the day the baby's due? He didn't actually say yes, but that was very much the implication of his answer when I saw him deal with that one. So he's got quite an unemotional style. The only time it was a bit emotive was talking about his coming out experience, as in only a few years ago when he declared himself to be a homosexual, saying how he desperately wanted not to be. If he could have chosen to be straight, he would have done so. But anyway, he's found the love of his life. So he's very happy. He's realized in that, living with his husband and their dog, and that's that. And his husband will be a fantastic father one day. So perhaps they want to adopt children. Anyway, it's notable how he endorses faith. Now, some Democrats are non-religious. Almost none of them actually come out as atheists. But they're often uncomfortable with this issue, think it shouldn't be part of this political forum, whereas Republicans are often gushing about their religiosity and how they're guided by their savior and things like that. So some Democrats find this perhaps cringe-making, or just think it's a way to give some veneer of respectability or morality to hard right policies. But Mayor Pete, as he likes to be known, Mayor Pete is not embarrassed to talk about it and how the Holy Scriptures guide him to believe this or that, and what he draws from its social justice and things like that. Anyone can make a selective reading of the Holy Bible, say, well, I believe this bit, well, I'll just disregard that one, because you can find anything you want in there. You can find warmongering, or you can find pacifism. You can find your obligation to care for the needy, or justifications of slavery. So it's all about cherry picking. So his religiosity will appeal to some Republicans, saying, well, here's someone who's got Jesus in his heart, because Republicans are always claiming that Democrats are anti-religious. Well, another thing is his last name, surname, as I would call it, Buttigieg, is a tongue twister for many. So he is mild enough to say, well, you can just call me Mayor Pete, which has perhaps got the right mix of formality and familiarity. He's a very genial type. I don't think many people will dislike him, but perhaps he's too ivory tower. You mustn't come across as too clever, as an intellectual, sneering at people, might be seen to be condescending. You know, John Kerry, he was lambasted for being able to speak French, as though speaking a foreign language is a bad thing, especially if you want to be the head of state. you know, even Mitt Romney. That was a problem for him. He helped bring the Winter Olympics to Salt Lake City in 2002, and he was filmed speaking French in a dreadful accent. But anyway, that was a problem. That was an obstacle for him. This is absurd. Obviously, it's a good thing. You want people to speak more languages. And Mayor Pete, he speaks 7, and he's candid enough to say that he's not fluent in them, not all of them. So I remember going back to Michael Dukakis way back in 1988, and George H.W. Bush sneering at him saying, "Oh, it sounds like something from Harvard Yard." Now, George Herbert Walker Bush had been to Yale, so it is a very similar educational background. But as though being highly educated is a detestable thing. Now, I know that some people can think their way out of common sense. That's the thing with those with a high cognitive ability, is they can defend the most absurd or detestable beliefs because they have this aptitude for lawyering their way out of common sense and seeking out information to reinforce the positions that they already hold, especially if they're emotionally attached to something. So they opine one way or the other, and they are gifted at taking a weak factual case and twisting it to appear to support something which is illogical or loathsome. But anyway, I don't think that's the true of Mayor Pete, as perhaps I should call him. So Mr. Buttigieg, he seems to be the perfect counterpoint to Donald Trump. Trump, who's so snarling and spiteful, aggressive, always just so malicious. So the two are contrasted. I think Buttigieg would come out as much better. Now, some of the real bigots, some of those who really doubt their masculinity, who are trying a bit too hard to be macho, would say, "Oh, Buttigieg is a faggot." Well, and just because he's civilized, just because he's courteous and he's cerebral, they will perceive that as being feeble, and that they think that you should be a boastful brute, a loudmouth, and so on, that reflects well in you, that's being manly, which of course it's not. It speaks of bottomless insecurity if you're compelled to act the way Donald Trump is, constantly harping on about how tough you are, talking up your accomplishments non-stop. So I think Buttigieg would be above all this. He appears to be generous, spirited, relaxed, sincere, honest. I don't know of any skeletons in his closet that anyone's pointed to. Anyway, so he has soared in the polls. He's garnering a great deal of funding. But, you know, it's too early to call. As the adage goes, he who enters the conclave as a pope comes out a cardinal. Is the front runner often doesn't get it. Is the obvious one is going to fall early. So there's a long way to go. The Democrats won't nominate their candidate until the summer of 2020. So the early riser often falls. But even if he doesn't get the nomination, or he could be the vice presidential candidate, he could certainly have a big future. The mayor of South Bend, Indiana, not a big place, and in a Republican state, so he's proved that he can appeal to people who are not natural Democratic voters. The demographics might appear to be against him there. And other things for him. Well, it's the 4th biggest city in Indiana, so it's not that tiny. But he's got himself a name on the national stage. But there are a lot of one-hit wonders, people who are going to be the next president and who are now forgotten, not even a footnote in history. Bill Bradley, way back in, 2004, or Wesley Clark, when he was going to get it for the Democrats, and again, we never heard of him again, sunk without trace. So it's certainly not a foregone conclusion for Pete Buttigieg. He's a fascinating candidate. He's making all the running at the moment, but, I wouldn't bet the house in it so far. So many more things could go wrong. So many stronger candidates could emerge. Some appear to be falling by the wayside, like Tulsi Gabbard or Amy Klobuchar. Well, although they're women, and although Tulsi Gabbard's fairly young, in other words, they're just too samey. They're perhaps not that distinctive. But they all have a far more respectable record than Donald Trump in terms of honesty, in terms of serving their people. Anyway, Mayor Buttigieg, well, I'm not American. I would vote for him.